Hi students, welcome to week 2, and this week we're going to look at Italy. So last week we looked at the 14th century context, all the major events that are going on in the history of Europe at the time that set the tone for the Renaissance and the Reformation, established the world in which the Renaissance and the Reformation are going to be born. But we all know that the Renaissance begins in Italy and is centered in Italy. So this week we're going to look more at the way that Italy is changing and developing during this period. And what we're going to see is that once again, this is a period of chaos, but also a period where individuals play a more exaggerated role than they had previously. Part of the reason for this is because of the way society is changing. Things that have been accepted are no longer taken for granted, and because of that, it means that there are more opportunities for individuals to kind of reshape the way that society is organized. And so we're going to look at the Renaissance politics of Italy. And that requires a study of the medieval background. So just a refresher on the situation in Europe at this time. We have the kingdoms of England and France, who have been fighting with one another. We have Spain, which is divided into multiple kingdoms: the Kingdom of Aragon in the east, Kingdom of Navarre in the north, the Kingdom of Castile in the center, Kingdom of Portugal in the west. Those are all the kingdoms ruled by Christians. And then we have the Kingdom of Granada in the south that's ruled by, it's the last remaining Islamic ruled kingdom. And then we have the huge Holy Roman Empire, which is not one kingdom, but it's kind of an amalgamation of a bunch of different local states. But that extends quite a long way south into Italy, and then we have the Papal States, and then we have the Kingdom of Sicily. Over here we have the Byzantine Empire, and then we have these kingdoms of Poland, Hungary, Serbia, and Bulgaria in Eastern Europe. What is the story of the medieval history of Italy? So we begin always the study of the Middle Ages with the fall of the Roman Empire that had dominated the period of the ancient world. And when the Roman Empire falls, the infrastructure that it had supported falls with it. And so the very stable societies that supported a healthy economy and the trade that went along with that disappear. And instead, you have the people resort to subsistence farming. That means they grow enough to feed themselves, but they're not growing any more than that. They don't really have access to further wealth than that. However, Italy is going to recover more quickly than the rest of Western Europe. The reason for this is that Italy is so close to the Byzantine Empire, which is just over here. The Byzantine Empire, as you probably know, is the eastern half, is what we call the eastern half of the Roman Empire. This part of the Roman Empire survives. That means there's still an economy that is sophisticated enough, a culture and a society that's stable enough to be carrying out trade, and Italy benefits from this. Italy is able to trade with the Byzantines. And so we see the development of the Italian medieval society. And so Italian society is made up of communes. This is a combination of the city, where we find people engaging in trade, and the contado. And the contado refers to the countryside around the city. So basically the farmland where the food was produced that supported the population of the city. And so this is a way in which Italy is different from the rest of Europe. It doesn't develop medieval monarchies and medieval kings and queens. Instead, we have these local city communes that sustain themselves through the food produced in the contado, that have a trading economy because of their proximity to the Byzantine Empire. And so an urban lifestyle and a higher population density, both of these aspects of the Roman Empire survive in Italy or re-emerge in Italy much more quickly than they do in other parts of Europe. However, there are political challenges for medieval Italy. First is the German emperors, so the rulers of that huge green area that's identified as the Holy Roman Empire on the previous slide. Holy Roman emperors see themselves as the successors of Charlemagne, who had ruled all of Italy, and they want to hold this land as well. And so they are constantly trying to increase their control in Italy. They consistently influence this area to the north, that's Lombardy, and they're consistently trying to push into these areas of Tuscany and Romagna throughout the medieval period. You also have the papacy. Papacy holds that it had received land in the center of Italy from Constantine. Why? To protect the independence of the papacy. This meant that the papacy or the popes could govern and lead the Catholic Church without having to compromise in order to get along with whoever was the political ruler. And so instead, Constantine, according to legend, had given this land to the papacy. So the papacy consistently going to be asserting its rule over this region called the Patrimony of St. Peter, but also into these areas further to the south, Campania, Spoleto, parts of Tuscany, parts of Romagna. And so you have this rivalry, this political rivalry, which is also a religious rivalry, because they're both claiming to lead the Christian people of Europe. This rivalry between the emperors and the papacy, they're constantly butting heads, and that's happening in Italy. At the same time, these communes, most of the time, they don't want to be ruled either by the emperors or by the popes. They'll gladly ally with one to protect them against the other, but they don't want to be too closely controlled. And so they will constantly play these two rivals off against one another, and with the main goal of maintaining their independence. Now, initially, these communes were governed by the local bishop. So you have the fall of the Roman Empire, you just have the disappearance of any kind of centralized government and law and order in these communities. And so people increasingly turn to their local bishops. That's the one piece of Roman infrastructure, or the infrastructure of the Roman world, that's left. These are the bishop is often the one remaining authority figure in the community once the empire has fallen. And so the bishops take on the responsibility of caring for these communities, providing them with food, maintaining their infrastructure, but also governing the community politically as well as spiritual leaders. However, by the time we move into the 12th and 13th centuries, this is starting to change. And communes are increasingly moving the bishops out of these governing positions of government, and they're replacing them with city councils. These city councils are typically made up of about 7 to 8 citizens, although each city was a little bit different. Now, it's important to recognize this was not a sign that this society was becoming less religious. This is still a deeply religious society. But there's just a change in how they want to manage the relationship of secular government and church leadership. They want to have more separation of the two. But the bishops still remain important and influential figures. They're still seen as the father figures of the whole commune. So now we're going to look at 4 of the most important regions of Italy and how those transition from this medieval setup of communes and the rivalry between the emperors and the papacy, how they make this transition from that scenario to the Renaissance. And so we're going to begin with Naples and Sicily, the southern part of Italy. In the 11th and 12th centuries, the Normans are going to conquer this region. Who were the Normans? Discussed this a little bit when we talked about the 14th century and the 100 Years' War. The Normans are the descendants of the Vikings who stop raiding and they settle in Europe. And they're nevertheless renowned for being great travelers and great warriors. And so one of the places where they travel to is southern Italy, and they use their power to defeat the local Muslim ruler and also the local Byzantine ruler, and set up a kingdom in southern Italy. In the 13th century, this kingdom fell into the hands of the German emperors, and this was kind of by a trick of inheritance. You have an heir who dies unexpectedly, and sort of the second in line has a biological relationship with the Holy Roman Emperor, and so basically their child becomes both the ruler of Sicily and Naples, southern Italy, and of the Holy Roman Empire. This was something that was opposed by the papacy. Why? Because the papacy is a rivalry, a political and a spiritual rival with the German emperors, with the Holy Roman emperors, and so they are now worried that they are totally surrounded to the north and to the south by the lands of these emperors. And so you're going to have an intensification of this rivalry. And in the end, the papacy is going to win. The popes are going to appeal to a French prince named Charles of Anjou, who's depicted here. And they encourage him and they fund him coming to southern Italy and defeating the emperors and seizing control of this kingdom. So now this is going to become not a Norman kingdom, not a kingdom ruled by the German emperors, but a French kingdom. However, the French are really unpopular. And so less than 20 years later, in 1282, this kingdom is going to change hands again. It changes hands in a rebellion called the Sicilian Vespers. Sicilian Vespers are significant because they show the people of Sicily rising up against the French, who are unpopular, and they have the support of the ruler of Aragon. Where's Aragon? Look back at the map on the previous slide, 2 slides ago, if you don't remember. Aragon is the kingdom in the eastern part of Spain, so it's sort of right over here. And Peter of Aragon is going to support the rebels, the Sicilian rebels against the French rulers, and he's going to become the ruler of Naples. And this is the beginning of the Aragonese and Spaniards establishing an influence in southern Italy. It's the other reason why the Sicilian Vespers are important. They mark the point where the Aragonese, rulers of eastern Spain, start to establish a Mediterranean empire, establish themselves as the rulers of southern Italy. There follows a really long and confusing war between the French side and the Spanish side over who is going to control Italian territory, but in the end, the two kingdoms are split. And so Naples is going to be ruled by the French side, the descendants of Charles of Anjou, and Sicily is going to be ruled by the descendants of Peter of Aragon, Spanish side. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the rulers of Naples, Angevin rulers of Naples. So note that word Angevin again. We talked about when we were talking about the 100 Years' War. Angevin refers to a region of France. That was where these rulers had come from. And so the Angevin rulers are famous for renovating the city of Naples. They made it into a beautiful city. They made it into a city that had all the beauty and architectural innovation of the Renaissance, and they established this city as a city of art. Fast forward a little bit until the 15th century, and now we come to Alfonso V. Alfonso V of Aragon, who is significant because he reunites these two kingdoms. He unites the regions of Naples, on the mainland here, and Sicily, the island here, as part of this empire of Aragon, this Mediterranean empire of that's headquartered in eastern Spain. And he is daring and resourceful, but his descendants have more of a reputation for cruelty and violence and excess. And so the kingdom is weakened during the second half of the 15th century. It becomes impoverished. Art becomes a source of entertainment, sometimes kind of crude entertainment, rather than a source of beauty. So some of the art that we're going to see is going to be art that's driven by the idea of raising human minds to higher things. Some of this art is just designed for entertainment and for horror and for thrills. And this is the case with Alfonso V's son Ferrante, who develops a mummy museum. And here are the mummies. These are the bodies of his political enemies who he embalmed and then kept where he could show to people who were visiting him. So you can imagine this was pretty frightening. And this is just kind of a sign of the way that this kingdom was ruled in the second half of the 15th century. At the end of the 15th century, it's going to be incorporated into the growing Spanish Empire that's going to encompass the New World as well as much of Europe that we'll talk about in later classes.